from the final investment decision being signed, that is the FID, which was signed in February this year, down to a year that has produced lots of prospects, besides the fact that the world of fuel and gas, let's say the oil and gas sector within the entire world, has been having issues regarding inflation. Earlier on, we had fuel shooting up as high as 8,000 Ugandan shillings. There was a time it actually shot up as high as 9,000 Ugandan shillings. If you put it in the dollar perspective, you would find a liter of petrol shooting towards much as $2 here in Uganda with the current dollar trends on the market. But then currently, as we're speaking now, a liter will definitely go and is basically ranging between 5,400 to 5,600. So that clearly shows you that fuel prices have actually been transitioning. That doesn't change anything regarding Uganda's oil and gas scope. However, with the final investment decision, which was taken, this led to the fact that we are going to be developing and, of course, construction of the facilities in the western part of Uganda, where mainly crude oil pipeline projects taking center stage. But besides that same situation, Uganda's hope for a fast drop of oil is 2025. Sure. So as we are discussing more about the oil and gas sector and the performance of the entire sector, of course, we do have Ronan Ahabwe, who is someone who has been in the field following up all the developments there to give us more about what has been happening within the sector and, of course, the future of the oil and gas in Uganda. Many thanks for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning, Ssonko. Thank you, and good morning to all the viewers that are watching us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, as we look at the oil and gas sector, the final investment decision was signed, undertaken, everything, all those agreements done. Of course, we had the key stakeholders, Total, Tanzania, and Uganda on the same agreement. But besides that, when you look at the developments regarding the summits that have been coming up, what are some of the key points that you've picked out from the oil and gas sector that Ugandans should as well know of?
Well, okay, the oil and gas sector is something I really like to talk about because I've reported it for a while and I think I'm a little bit versed with it. So, ever since they signed the final investment decision, out from that, before I even get the final investment decision, Uganda discovered its oil in 2006. Yeah. And the past few years, we have been trying to develop it. It has explored, it has surpassed the exploration stage. Now this year, mainly it has been development. Now Uganda awarded Total Energies and Ssonko licenses to develop these resources. This is in the Albertine region where they are constructing the Tilenga and the Kingfisher project. Now, these are the projects that are going to develop the oil. Yes. So, mainly, leave alone the final investment decision, we do know that Mulondo, the executive director of Petroleum Authority of Uganda, said that we should be getting investments should shoot up to $3 billion as opposed to what was predicted last year, that was $230 million. So this is a project of a huge magnitude. And of course, we have seen how sensitive it is, the eco and stuff like that. But this could be the project that would maybe even make us attain the middle income status. Because if you have our own oil, then fluctuating fuel prices will not be an issue. And of course, as we continue to look at the oil and gas sector, we now have a report that was compiled by Ronan Ahabwe regarding the oil and gas development phase, which is shaping up in the country. Let's first have a look at this particular one, and Ronan Ahabwe is going to be giving us a breakdown of the same report.
Uganda's oil and gas sector has transitioned from having only an exploration to new explorations and preparation of the discovered oil fields for production. The developments also include putting in place infrastructure for both commercialization of the discovered 6.5 billion barrels of oil and gas resources and facilitating the developments in the sector. The final investment decision for Uganda's oil and gas projects, approximately worth $20 billion, was signed in February 2022. This was by the Uganda National Oil Company with its joint partners Total EP Uganda and the Chinese National Oil Company and the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development.
The jobs created, there's the skilled labor, there is the semi-skilled labor, there is the unskilled labor. And you're looking at like 160,000 jobs across all projects being created in this period, right? So those are things that make any country smile when you have such huge projects coming into your place, because it sends a signal. The people internally are happy, there's money, and it has spin-off effects. The jobs, you can't, I mean, they are evident. The investor confidence that we can rally this kind of investor right now into our economy sends a very good signal for us internationally. And that's what you want as a country. So definitely we are seeing this contribution as something the long awaited for.
The policy framework for the oil and gas sector highlights key issues, including 7 sets of regulations on technical, health, safety and environment, national content, among others. All major oil and gas developments, including the Tilenga, Kingfisher, the East African crude oil pipeline and the refinery projects, were first subjected to a preliminary environmental and social screening process that informed the conceptual design of the projects. Subsequently, a rigorous risk impact assessment process was undertaken in line with the national environment laws and the international best practices. The environmental challenge is the management of impacts associated with the oil and gas industry, like the oil spills, fires, waste management, contamination of the environment, and therefore there is a potential risk to adversely impact on areas located within the graben, like the national game parks, forests, and water bodies, including Lake Albert and River Nile.
Before any project is commenced, the National Environment Management Authority has to issue what we call an ESIA, Environmental Social Impact Assessment Report. How is that obtained? The company has to demonstrate, it has to demonstrate to NEMA that we have these systems in place to ensure that we are not going to affect the environment where we are operating, we are not going to affect the people, we are not going to affect the plantation and so on, the forest cover, all these aspects. So before that license or that permit is issued, there is supposed to be a public hearing where the people affected by a project are invited and the project speaks to them in the presence of NEMA and other critical government authorities.
In an article written by Dr. Joseph Kobsheshe, a director of Environment and Health Safety at Petroleum Authority of Uganda, he states the oil and gas industry could be a solution to greenhouse gas emissions reduction. This is by providing more Ugandans access to cleaner energy, eliminate emissions associated with import of petroleum products, provide alternative sources of livelihoods such as LPG, and lessen the dependency on environmentally degrading economic systems.
The opportunity now has been that actually the goal of the sector is to ensure that when petroleum activities in these areas cease, we are leaving the area in a much better place than we found it, and that we call the net gain program. So the net gain program being implemented within Murchison Falls National Park is aimed at ensuring that overall there is a net positive gain in terms of biodiversity as we implement the petroleum activities.
The category
So, and of course, that is something that is ideally one of the key discussions in Uganda's oil and gas. That is the development phase that is shaping up. We had a team that went there earlier this year to follow up on the final stages and, of course, the initial stages of the other areas around the Albertine region, where, of course, Uganda's oil and gas exploration is taking place. Of course, you as well get to realize we also have an airport, that is the Hoima International Airport, that side of the Albertine region, Western Uganda still. Chibale. Yeah. So when you look at some of these particular things, Uganda's oil and gas sector, like I did mention, is a sector that is definitely going to be shaping up the economy in a few years to come, especially after the first drop of oil in 2025, which is highly expected. And the hopes are high that, yes, it is 2025 coming up. But when you look at the development phase shaping up, which developments did you get to notice around the area that most of the viewers should know about Uganda's oil and gas? Speaking of which, also, what happened to the people who were settling around the lake?
Okay, so mostly they were developing the central processing facility,
okay,
which is now, I believe, at 50% also, if I'm not mistaken. So that central processing facility is the one that will develop the oil once it's brought from the Albertine region. And you see, mainly this year has been shaping up. Stop ECOP, bashing ECOP, the EU resolution, insurance companies, international insurance companies pulling out. And so people have come out really, and the president himself was like, if Total cannot go on with this contract, I will give it to someone else. Because we really need this oil, and by the time it was discovered, they knew was going to be a game changer.
Okay.
So as for national content, I would like to maybe touch a little bit on later. Mainly, it was ECOP for me this year. Stop ECOP. But why? You could ask yourself, why is ECOP being targeted?
Yes. Stop ECOP, and the trends are still ongoing on social media.
Yes. Why you would ask yourself, why do you think people are targeting the ECOP? That is because it is the one that will link us to the global market.
Okay.
It is going to transport the oil from Uganda to Tanga in Tanzania.
Yes.
It's buried. It's a pipeline that is buried down. So all people that were occupying that area, that land, were vacated.
Yes.
And most of them are being compensated.
Okay.
So some are being built houses for, others receive money.
Okay. Every
Person that was occupying that area within 30 meters was vacated.
Okay.
So the ECOP is very sensitive. And when I was interviewing Peter Mulisa, the chief legal officer from UNOC,
okay,
he says it's absurd that people are looking at ECOP, yet they have other projects.
Okay.
There is the Tilenga project, the Kingfisher projects. They are all being managed by UNOC. So you would wonder why they are looking at ECOP.
Basically looking at.
So they are really very strategic because they know that it's the one that is going to transport the oil from Uganda, even though people will get the profits, but Uganda surely will get its profits.
Okay. But of course,
I'd like to be optimistic.
Some people have actually been against ECOP due to the fact that some believe it is it does have a say, or it will contribute to climate change.
Yes.
And of course, the discussions we've been having regarding what the resolutions of COP26, for example, last year, then COP27 this year, was to address climate change. Now, ECOP, according to some of those who are against it, are saying it is one that is actually going to lead to climate change.
Yeah.
However, the government says it is not as it seems to be portrayed by most of these particular critics.
Now, let me tell you what I know.
Okay.
I do know that, well, to be objective about this, from the information I've gathered, is that they say that ECOP is environmental responsive. That he himself, Dr. Kobusheshi, said that there is the net gain project, a program that is going to be able, the emissions that are going to be released in air, not as compared to the emissions that are being released as the trucks come into the country, the trucks that bring fuel, if you know what I mean. So they say that the project is environmentally responsive. It was assessed in Tanzania, it was assessed also here, NEMA assented to it. So they say it's environmentally responsive, and it won't be a little bit sensitive to the environment. But I also need to note that I recently saw a report where people from Hoima were complaining that the dust is getting all over the roof.
Okay.
And then Miss Gloria Serikali, the communications from Petroleum Authority Uganda, came out and said that this is just a moment of time. It will come down once the rains, start to power in the area.
Okay. Now let's talk the financial matters from the oil and gas sector by looking at the Uganda oil revenue, and of course why we should be anticipating more from the oil and gas sector. More of these details in this report.
In May 2019, Uganda launched the second licensing round for petroleum exploration at the 9th East African Petroleum Conference and Exhibition in Mombasa.
All right, Dr. Albert, thank you very much, Prof. So, Dr. Albert, you can give us guidance.
Oil production revenue has the potential to significantly boost economic activity and with careful management might result in greater rate of sustainable economic growth. And for this reason, the Ministry of Finance promises to follow the Charter's guidelines in order to achieve financial responsibility and debt sustainability.
A charter is a kind of a commitment by the ruling government that we shall live within these means, that in terms of expenditure, we shall make sure that we are able to balance our revenues with the borrowing to this magnitude. So that's what the charter is doing, to make sure that we don't move out of those limits that can cause havoc to the economy. So that's what we are doing. It's actually about revenue, expenditure, management, and ensuring that as we spend, we do not go beyond. First, when we talk about the fiscal rule, we are simply saying that you will have a budget of so much money. For instance, we now have a budget of 48 trillion shillings. Now, out of that budget, when we talk about a fiscal deficit, we are talking about the difference between the budget and what you are able to raise as revenue. So, raising revenue is actually, those are our resources as government. Those are the resources we have as a government. Now, beyond that, beyond the revenue, if you have a budget of 48 and you are able to raise only 25 trillion shillings in terms of revenue, the import of that is that you have 13 trillion shillings that you might have to borrow. Make sure you implement your budget. Now, that 13 trillion shillings is expressed in terms of the GDP. And so you have the fiscal deficit.
The strengthened fiscal frameworks, as mandated by the Public Finance Management Act 2015, necessitate new components of fiscal policy management, such as numerical split between oil revenues directed towards the budget spending against the oil revenues channeled towards the saving in the Petroleum Revenue Fund.
I will answer this because we participated in the designing of the fiscal rule for the oil revenues. The way it's going to work, there is a petroleum fund, which is like a collecting fund or a holding fund. All the monies from oil and gas will go to that fund, but it is like a holding fund. When it reaches there, then it has to be distributed to either the budget or the infrastructure reserve fund. How much goes to the budget? It needs to be done carefully to avoid hitting the economy, distorting the economy. And so the rule is that the maximum you can transfer to the budget, to the consolidated fund, is 0.8% of the previous year's non-oil GDP outturn. It is very important that you target to your GDP, because
out of the expected $2.8 billion in oil earnings per year, 0.8% of the previous year's GDP will be allocated to budget finance, and this is how the oil money will be routed to budget financing versus the Petroleum Revenue Reserve. The graph below depicts oil revenue split between transfers to the budget and the price transfers to the previous fiscal year, with $55 as average of price of oil in GDP. Setting a reasonable amount on the budget's use of oil reserves will ensure enough savings are made during the prosperous periods, that is the peak production versus the high oil prices, hence reducing the potential pro-cyclical of these transfers to the budget. Rona Nahabwe, Smart 24 TV, Business Today.
Well, after the break, we're discussing more of the oil revenues and how it's going to be split up, who is responsible for these fundings, and how they're going to be managed. That and more after the break.
Smart 24, driving business.
Getting together for the first time in years was a little bit awkward. Grandpa still tried to entertain us. Mom was always stealing the spotlight from the kids. It wasn't until Grandma cracked a joke
That's my favorite prayer.
that we got back into our groove. In this festive, DSTV is making family time even better with an upgrade.
Stay connected to DSTV and we'll upgrade you to the next package for free.
Buto, the taste of Uganda in a new international park.
Smart 24, driving business.
All right, and as we return here with the discussions of 2022 in business, just to remind you that you can as well invest in bonds and securities with Zabu. Zabu, a platform by Altex East Africa, is here for you. Use the USSD code *292#. Follow the prompts and definitely kickstart your investment journey. The markets open at 8:15 a.m. and close at 3:15 p.m. East African Standard Time. So that means with a minimum of 15,000 Ugandan shillings today, if you do have an account, you can invest in bonds and securities. But if you do not have the account, you can open up one with your NIN. In the next 24 hours, you'll be ready to invest in bonds and securities. So Zabu says, my money, my future. Altex East Africa reminds you to do something new. The year is coming to an end. We are ushering into 2023. So you can start investing into the Uganda financial market space with Zabu, which is a platform by Altex East Africa. Well, just recently, there was a social media tweet that was made by the New Vision Wire regarding Uganda's oil and gas sector. I think this as well sums up some of those particular discussions. And this was regarding the Uganda National Oil Company Limited taking over the management of the Jinja Fuel Storage Terminal. And so now the terminal is in the hands of UNOC, that is the Uganda National Oil Company Limited. And well, besides that, we speak more of the oil revenues in Uganda, and we get another detailed report regarding the same matter, as Ronan Ahawe is still here to give us more regarding Uganda's oil and gas sector.
The oil project is one of those estimated to spur the economic development in the country. In 2006, discoveries of commercially viable oil reserves in Uganda raised hopes of a timely boost to economic growth in the country. 12 years later, despite the pressing development needs, Uganda is yet to move to the production stage to derive significant revenues from the resource. The question, though, is whether the Ugandan government will manage to avoid squandering it and transform the country's natural resource assets into productive assets. To this end, the government has made significant changes and additions to the policy and institutional framework that will govern the use of the revenues.
Is coming out of oil, when first oil starts, have been destined to be put in the petroleum fund. Clearly, the Public Finance and Management Act is very clear about that. So there are things that have been put in place to make sure that when the revenues start flowing, they're used right. And it's ring-fenced for strictly infrastructure development. So that's how it is working. And so if I was to throw a little more light, I mean, that is it really. The money is ring-fenced, it's going to the oil fund, and its utilization will follow the framework that was developed in 2015. How do you invest it? But also, there is an investment fund. The other one is the petroleum fund, ring fence for development. There is also an investment fund where some of the money will be saved for future generations. Apart from the money being brought in, you see that in the regions of $8 billion, right? That is the money being brought in this construction phase. Now, every time that magnitude of funds come into a country, you're sure that it's not going to leave that place the same, okay? Because there's a lot of spin-offs. The contractor is going to do this job.
The regulator of this industry says the opportunities coming with these industries are immense and they will reach every Ugandan.
The value or the benefits of the oil and gas sector to Uganda's economy are mainly through three areas. The first one is giving Ugandans the opportunity for employment and also providing goods and services, the enterprises, what is usually called local content. The plan is to have about 40% of the investment that's going to be made in the country going to Ugandan entities. The second one is the revenue that the country will earn after production of oil starts. This is expected to be over $1 billion and up to $2 billion, depending on the oil price. And then the relationship between the oil and gas sector and other sectors of the economy is also another area that will earn value for the country. And this could come up to anywhere, depending on how well it is done, anywhere between $8–10 billion.
Ronana Habwe, Smart 24 TV, driving business.
And how it's going to be done in Uganda, how are they going to tap into the money? So when we speak revenues, we're now speaking of money, the monetary terms. And I believe this is where most of the Ugandans are more eager to listen and understand. So when you look at the oil revenues here, who is responsible for these finances?
So clearly,
okay,
the oil revenues, of course, are going to be split. It's not going to be direct cash mostly. Some of it is going to be direct and another indirect. Let's talk about the money that will come from the oil itself. We know that Uganda was advised to have a petroleum fund. A petroleum fund that will be managed by the central bank, that is Bank of Uganda. And in the story that will be played later, you will see when people are launching a charter, Ministry of Finance is going to be launching a charter that is going to prepare for these resources so that they are managed well.
Okay.
The most important thing is that when we maximize, the maximizing of these revenue benefits will also be implemented by how efficient we have maximized the revenue chain. Okay. This is going to be a chain that is a process. So if we maximize the profits badly, of course, Uganda won't reap. The rest, the people that have invested, that is Total Energies and Ssonko, will have their profits and they will leave the country and then they will bring other people to contract.
Okay.
And other linkages. But the indirect part of it that I'm talking about, the revenue, is that there are going to be sectorial linkages.
Okay.
Opportunities are immense, so they say. The agriculture, food processing, there are people that stay there in Hoima that need shelter, hotels, all those opportunities. Really, a project of that magnitude that is taking almost 3 districts, Chibale, Hoima, all those districts that are on the western border of DRC, that is a big project. Like I said earlier, it's the project of a big magnitude that if managed well, Uganda could really reap a lot.
Okay. And of course, as Rona has mentioned, that if we manage it properly, or if it's well managed, Uganda would reap something big. Like I did say as well, that the next few decades, this is a sector that is entirely going to be shaping up Uganda's economy. But now let's look at another report regarding the same matter, this time around, also targeting the issue to do with financing, but as well looking at oil revenues in the country.
All right, Dr. Albert, thank you very much, Prof. So, Dr. Albert, you can give us guidance.
Oil production revenue has the potential to significantly boost economic activity, and with careful management might result in greater rate of sustainable economic growth. And for this reason, the Ministry of Finance promises to follow the Charter's guidelines in order to achieve financial responsibility and debt sustainability.
A charter is a kind of a commitment by the ruling government that we shall live within these means, that in terms of expenditure, we shall make sure that we are able to balance our revenues with the borrowing to this magnitude. So that's what the charter is doing, to make sure that we don't move out of those limits that can cause havoc to the economy. So that's what we are doing. It's actually about revenue, expenditure, management, and ensuring that as we spend, we do not go beyond. First, when we talk about the fiscal rule, we are simply saying that you will have a budget of so much money. For instance, we now have a budget of 48 trillion shillings. Now, out of that budget, when we talk about a fiscal deficit, we are talking about the difference between the budget and what you are able to raise as revenue. So, raising revenue is actually, those are our resources as government. Those are the resources we have as a government. Now, beyond that, beyond the revenue, if you have a budget of 48 and you are able to raise only 25 trillion shillings in terms of revenue, the import of that is that you have 13 trillion shillings that you might have to borrow. Make sure you implement your budget. Now, that 13 trillion shillings is expressed in terms of the GDP. And so you have the fiscal deficit.
The strengthened fiscal frameworks, as mandated by the Public Finance Management Act 2015, necessitate new components of fiscal policy management, such as numerical split between oil revenues directed towards the budget spending against the oil revenues channeled towards the saving in the Petroleum Revenue Fund.
I will answer this because we participated in the designing of the fiscal rule for the oil revenues. The way it's going to work, there is a petroleum fund, which is like a collecting fund or a holding fund. All the monies from oil and gas will go to that fund, but it is like a holding fund. When it reaches there, then it has to be distributed to either the budget or the infrastructure reserve fund. How much goes to the budget? It needs to be done carefully to avoid hitting the economy, distorting the economy. And so the rule is that the maximum you can transfer to the budget, to the consolidated fund, is 0.8% of the previous year's non-oil GDP outturn. It is very important that you target to your GDP, because
out of the expected $2.8 billion in oil earnings per year, 0.8% of the previous year's GDP will be allocated to budget finance, and this is how the oil money will be routed to budget financing versus the Petroleum Revenue Reserve. The graph below depicts oil revenue split between transfers to the budget and the price transfers to the previous fiscal year, with $55 as average of price of oil in GDP. Setting a reasonable amount on the budget's use of oil reserves will ensure enough savings are made during the prosperous periods, that is the peak production versus the high oil prices, hence reducing the potential pro-cyclical of these transfers to the budget. Rona Nahabwe, Smart 24 TV, Business Today.
Okay, the oil and gas financing is what has been entailed in the two reports, which also includes the budget financing. I still wanted to, as we're summing this up, this particular one. So this financing, is there a specific committee from UNOC or the Petroleum Authority, or do we have a specific committee from the Ministry of Energy?
Well, it's a joint collaboration.
Okay.
The regulator, of course, Petroleum Authority of Uganda, Uganda National Oil Company, Ministry of Energy and Development. These are the ones that are in charge of these resources. But then we also have Ministry of Finance. Ministry of Finance, which is the gatekeeper of all the finances in the country. That's why you see they launched the charter where they will, so that they plan for these resources before they even come. Accountability is very key in this aspect. Oil and gas sector is very famous. Everyone knows how much you're going to reap from it. So if you're not going to make something that is reliable and viable for Ugandans to know that the profits will not leave the country, that Ugandans were able to be transformed by this, so you'd rather have accountability noted. And that's why they mentioned that the petroleum fund will be reserved, ring-fenced strictly. That it will only be tampered if, when there are cases of maybe supplementary budgets, when they need to finance and they just tap onto the petroleum fund. But mainly, that petroleum fund would be used to develop more oil resources.
And well, of course, during this very year, there were supplier workshops by the Uganda National Oil Company. And the last one was mainly focusing on the risk attachment to the suppliers, or the risks attached to the oil and gas sector. And of which now we take a look at another report regarding the supplier summits that were taking place within 2022.
To address potential financial risks and how to manage them, banks have put in place mechanisms on contractor risk and financial management.
And I'll start with contract risk specifically. So what we've seen is there's a stringent bidding process. And after the bidding process, a contract is signed. But from the time the contract is signed to the time that the contractor is supposed to start is really short. So there's a really short time in which to mobilize the funds, and I'm sure a number of the contractors in the room will agree. So what are we saying? Or what is our response to this? Or what would the risk be? Let me just speak on the risk. The risk is that because you have such a short time to mobilize, you're not able to get the required funds to be able to plan properly for the work that you need to do, right? So what then is our response to this? You need to be able to plan early.
To increase the level of participation in the oil and gas, banks are willing to offer several products to suppliers that have been contracted to offer services in the oil and gas industry, such as guarantees and other forms of credit access.
Because I want you to understand that in oil and gas, the banks don't compete. The banks cooperate. That's because the opportunity is so big. It is so big that we have to work together. If somebody comes to me and says, I have a contract which is worth $5 million. $5 million is worth 15 billion Uganda shillings. Okay, almost not 15, 18 billion Uganda shillings. Who has security of 22 billion? Nobody. So even we are businessmen also. We know that's not possible. So how do we accommodate that? And so some of the answers Eva is talking about is we give it piece by piece. The reason that one moment they ask you about security, as she said, is because there's a worry that you might not be able to perform on the first one. But my advice to you is this. Convince them you'll do a first one. Don't go for such big amounts at the beginning, or if you can stagger it. And if you have security, I tell you the bank is happy to release the security once you've proven performance. Because as I said, the risk is not on you, it's on the person to pay you if you perform.
The government intends to implement the National Content Fund through the oil and gas industry to expand access financing so that the credit is freely accessible and there is inclusivity.
Affordable to access money to be able to execute contracts in the oil and gas sector. We are in the later stages of these negotiations and we are working closely with the banks, but we know financing is a big challenge. However, apart from just creating the National Content Fund, we've also been in constant negotiations with the international oil companies to see that when contracts are being negotiated, the payment terms allow for short payment periods and that there are frequent payment milestones. That way, if you're a contractor and you get a contract, you're able to execute and be paid for at least every milestone that you complete.
Speaking to one of the suppliers at the workshop, she mentioned that one quick solution to financing is joint venture partnerships, which are usually a success as they reduce risk and project more confidence for big contracts.
Many companies in Uganda have challenges of funding, but we are happy to know that Ssonko is partnering with so many banks. And if you are an organized company, you can get credit from banks, or else you can even do partnerships with different organizations that are already on board. So it depends on your relationship with the organization, and it's great when you also do networking.
More case studies on oil-producing nations like Norway and Nigeria are being used as feasibility studies for Uganda to aid in decision-making. Ronana Habwe, Smart 24 TV, Business Today.
Well, of course, that is a report regarding the summit, the supplier summit. That particular one was regarding the last supplier summit that was there, and it was basically looking at risk as the risks attached to the oil and gas sector, especially from the perspective of the suppliers. Yeah. So as we look at this particular one, we've got a lot of suppliers to the sector. We have those who are directly supplying, and then we have those who are indirectly supplying. Of course, the banks are supplying credit and all that. Then what else should we be expecting? Because we expect this same summit of this nature to happen in 2023.
First of all, I would like to give credit to UNOC because this year they have really gone all out there with the supplier workshops. And this in a way has shaped the narrative for other sectors. For instance, electricity also held its national content supplier workshop in regards to making sure that Ugandans benefit from these resources. So Ernest Rubondo, the executive director of Power, mentioned that 40% of these investments from oil and gas should be able to remain in the country. What that means is that people or Ugandans should be able to see the opportunities, access them, and use them to the best of their advantage. That supplier network basically was meant to align most people that are credible to access credit and then also participate. Like I told you before, there are lots of linkages. You don't have to benefit mainly as a contractor, of course. I don't think, apart from Excel, the one that is contracted for Kingfisher that has that contract, there are other subcontracts. Agriculture, food processing, hotels, so that we can be able to benefit. And in a way, with these linkages, that's how other sectors in the economy will grow. So the supplier workshop, mainly, what I picked from that story and which I like to briefly talk about is they advise those Ugandans, those suppliers, that if you cannot afford you don't have the collateral for the certain contract, or you cannot afford to get that credit to be able to participate in the oil and gas sector. What you do is collaborate with another company so that you merge your incomes together and then push out these other foreign investors. You realize if Ugandans are not, for lack of a better word, not broke or poor, not having enough money to ascertain or sustain themselves for these resources, more foreigners will come and take these profits and they will reap and then they will go. What is interesting is that they will go because from this oil and gas industry, 100,000 LPG is meant to be gotten from the oil and gas. This gas can go and then to be brought back and sold in Uganda at high rates. So the opportunities for Ugandans to utilize are immense, but if they are not utilized well, the government can always bring in foreigners, and then they will give them tax incentives, and then they will develop these resources, and then they will make sure that they reap.
Okay, and of course, as we're summing up with the oil and gas sector performance this very year, let's head into the last report that is basically looking at the Uganda National Oil Company, inclusive of the other stakeholders from Nigeria, apparently. So let's first have this report, then we come back and analyze it more.
a unique body created by the Ugandan government. And we like the way, for us in Nigeria and as pattern, the way they are going about well-articulated a program for the future, such that, and they are very emphatic about the first oil by 2025. And I know from what the assurances we have had, that is something they will achieve. And then when you develop your natural resources, it goes with growth, it goes with poverty alleviation and prosperity for everybody. One thing that is instrumental is to make sure that along the way, you grow capacities and capabilities.
The chairman commended the idea of establishing a fund to oversee the wealth of Ugandan suppliers.
Deliberate effort, which is still operational, for the National Content Development Fund. It's 1% set aside from every contract from Tier 1 to Tier 2 to Tier 3, so long as you are a supplier in or service provider. And I'm happy to hear that the Ugandan National Oil Company is following the same step. It is good. It provides that fund to be able to carry everybody along the way.
Food content basically is trying to address the role of the Ugandan locals in contributing to the growth of that industry. And so far, so good, yes, because it's a lot of learning. It's a marathon, as we say. It's not a race, it's a marathon. And it's a gradual process. It keeps growing over time. And as it's growing, the Ugandan companies will begin to grow their own expertise in the industry. Yeah, but the way it is going to run for now, it's going to have to do with a lot of collaboration with those who are already experienced in the industry, like the Nigerian companies.
And of course, that is something to do with it. If you're to follow up on the situations here, Nigeria is one of those particular countries that is involved in oil and gas within the African continent. So among the oil producing countries across the African continent. So they being part of Uganda's oil and gas sector is basically because we are using Nigeria among its other countries as a benchmarking country on how their sector is faring and how best we can be part of the same matter to do with oil and gas. So when you look at the Nigeria and oil relations, what mainly was the reason behind the Nigerians coming on board in Uganda's oil and gas sector?
First of all, I would like to mention that Nigeria discovered its oil in 1956.
Okay.
And as of now, they export 847,000 tons of crude oil per year. That's a lot of oil.
Oh, okay.
And oil, let me give you, I don't even need to give you an example, I think, but when we had a fuel crisis shortage in Uganda, you saw how much there was a lot of backlog, a lot of businesses were pulled out. Fuel is the driver of the economy. Without fuel, we can't go far. And for a country like Uganda that still exports fuel.
That imports.
Yeah, that still imports fuel. We surely need oil. We surely need this fuel. And the sooner it is developed, the better. So mainly that workshop, brought Nigerian experts in to give them knowledge and advice on how best they can manage their resources of oil. And one of the things that I picked from that workshop is that the Nigerians advised Ugandans, Ministry of Energy, Power, all that sector, that the best way they can manage these resources is collaborations.
Okay.
And mainly collaborations within Africa. Better, because these are the people that have the experience. Those people started way back, the French and the Chinese started way back developing their oil, but Africans, they really need to retain their profit and revenue.
Okay.
So they advise them mainly to collaborate with Africans, the ones that drill oil, so that they can be able to understand the sector better, since it's a new experience for Uganda.
And of course, that's it for this particular sector of the oil and gas in Uganda. And of course, the sector that we shall be giving you more details come 2023 about its projections and, of course, its development. Any development that comes by, Ronan Ahabo will as well be giving you all those detailed reports and stories regarding Uganda's oil and gas sector and its performance in general. Well, besides that, we are out of here, but still on the daily programming today, coming up is looking at sectors like banking, innovation, amongst others. So stick around to Smart 24 TV, as today we will be looking back at 2022 in business, what has been transpiring in business and where next should we be looking at in 2023? Where are the hopes? Which sectors are likely to revamp Uganda's economy? That and more will be coming up. I'm Joram Ssonko, and I've been with Ronan Ahabo. I first of all had Samla Hanifa and Ivan Tibenkana, who are as well breaking it down for us. You can go into our YouTube channel, Smart 24 TV Live, for more of those particular updates and the analysis that has been made today. Have yourselves a good morning, but stick around to Smart 24. Coming up shortly, Barija Andrew and Ivan Tibenkana take you forward in regards to matters regarding 2022 in business.
Smart 24, driving business.